State and local government to come to order. It is Tuesday, January 28th, 2:25. The time is 12:35. The first item on the agenda is Senate File 59. Senator Green. And members, I think in your packet you should have, I think, is it a written amendment in the packet? Oh, okay. Senator Green, welcome to the State Government Committee. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I appreciate you hearing my bill today. I do have an amendment I'd like to get on. It's something that I didn't really think was necessary, and so if it's just the author's amendment to strike on page 3 line and delete line 8.
All right, Senator Green, thank you for your amendment. Would we need somebody to move the amendment? Author's amendment? Senator Drazkowski moves the A1 amendment. All in favor of the A1 amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. All right. The amendment is adopted. Senator Green, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll explain the bill a little bit, and I believe I have a testifier online, and then I've got some other stuff that I'd like to share with the committee as well. This was brought to me actually a few years ago. That what has been happening is I believe that the surveyors are using equipment now that is obviously much better than it was when they went through 100 years ago with a 16.5-foot rod and chain. But when they did go through with those and set markers, those were the boundaries. And so all of our land transfers, buying, selling, has been based on those markers. And over the years, they've been allowed to deteriorate. And now we have the surveyors coming through, and they are surveying with the new technology, and they're moving these boundary lines, and it's causing a lot of angst within the communities all across the state, actually, but I'm just dealing with my own right now. We have an issue with money, I guess, but I think that we're going to have to work that out. There was some money put into it, but it hasn't really gone far enough. And I would like to see these markers established. And before I get into the stuff that I want to read, I was going to, so my testifier online doesn't have to wait. If we could go to him first, that'd be great.
Certainly. We have a Mr. Alan Olson on Zoom. Mr. Olson, if you are on Zoom, please state your name and you can begin your testimony.
My name is Alan Roger Olson. I live in little town of Langby, 44389 393rd Avenue Southeast, just south of Highway 2. And we've been in contact with Mr. Green on some of these property issues. And I'll just give a short synopsis of what's been going on. My father purchased this property in 1959. He sold some property to a guy to the south of me that has 10 acres. Originally it was a 60-acre plot. Now it's, I own 50. He has 10 acres. He purchased this property probably almost 20 years ago. In 2010, he put up a new building. Polk County gave him the setback and gave him a map of all his property lines, which were in line with what they were when my dad sold the property to this neighbor. Somewhere in between then, probably 4 or 5 years ago, Daryl Donnell is the property owner's name, wanted to add an addition to his house and connect and put a shop up, and so he got a building permit. He was informed that in his building permit that he did not own his well and septic anymore after the new survey was done. And so we've been dealing with this for quite some time, trying to rectify what I believe is more or less a survey issue, because I know where the property lines were, and they were shown to us in 2010 as to where these lines were, and now they've changed. It also shows that I own property across County Road 4, which was never part of my deed ever before. So we believe there's some things going on with these surveys. We all know, as Mr. Green said, that the newer technology using GIS and GPS is new. But if you look at the definition of GIS, it is supposed to be used as a tool, not as the final say on where some of these markers and pins are at. So we just feel there is some issue going on here, changing some lines that's causing a lot of problems in our township and in our county.
All right, thank you, Mr. Olson. Senator Green, do you have any other testifiers with you?
I have a lot of folks that have contacted me, but I know I only had 15 minutes. I think you guys have got testimony from Mr. Gene Scott. Do you have that in front of you? So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on what's going on, because his is reminiscent of that, except for the one egregious case where thankfully they did settle, where they actually moved the boundary line, and an elderly lady lost her whole house, and she had to go into negotiations with her neighbor to get her house back. But Mr. Scott lives just south of me, and as I understand it, so the county puts out a plat book every year, and they're not legally binding. They're just to give you a reference as to where stuff is. And somewhere along the line in that plat book, through some measurement, the line showed that the original property line that had been there for probably 100 years was into the field, and it was next to state school trust land. And so the agency came in and informed Mr. Scott that he was farming school trust land, and he argued the case, but he didn't have the resources to fight it. And so now he is forced to buy a lease to cross what he has had in his possession for his whole life, basically. And so this, when they drew this line, just like in the case of Mr. Olson, they moved him all south, so he now owns land on the other side of a county road, which our county roads are basically our boundary lines in northern Minnesota. And so this is the kind of stuff that's going on. I've got my own reference to this. I did a survey on my property just to see, and they came in, and I know where my monument is, and they moved it 20 feet either way, both to the south and to the east. And my neighbor did another one, and on his survey, they must have went off a different pin, because his moved that line like closer to between 50 and 100 feet, and it would go right through the middle of my house. And if that was actually the line when they first did this, the house I grew up in, which was north of that, would not even have been on my property, my grandfather's property. So this is a real issue for us. We've tried in the past to get stuff moving on this. It's been moving very slow. And what this bill does is it will require the counties to go in and do the best job they can to find these original monuments and reestablish them so that we can fix this before it goes any further than it already has. That is the bill. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator Green. Any questions or comments from members on the panel? Senator Gustafson.
Sorry, work around all my stuff here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Green. I just had a couple of questions based on this letter we have from the Association of Minnesota Counties. It says that the timeline for a county to complete assessment of all monuments and to preserve and restore those that are destroyed or obscured by 2028 is unrealistic, and the funding necessary to complete the remonumentation process is significant. So my first question is about that, addressing the funding and the timeline. And then my second question is also in this letter, where it says counties are also concerned with the language that would require each county to employ a land surveyor, as both limited funding and staff resources are part of the reason this project will take so long to finish. So do you have any answers to those two concerns?
Senator Green.
Chair, I'll answer the land surveyors first of all. When I went down for my own dispute, and then also for the other disputes to the county where I live, their response was, you have to hire a land surveyor to do that, and then they'll come in and tell us, okay, if you want a land surveyor, then that's what you'll get, and that's why it's in the bill. As far as the funding goes, I understand the issue with funding. I don't like putting unfunded mandates on anybody, basically, and especially not local governments. But the question here is the neglect that's happened over the years. Government has certain roles, and I think we overstep those roles, but one of those roles, and I think other testifiers might say this as well, is we are to preserve the safety, but we're also supposed to preserve the property rights. And so I will work on trying to get funding through different sources that we have gotten through before. But in the meantime, this stuff has to get started, because every day that goes by and every other assessment or survey that's done that moves these lines is one more thing that'll have to be corrected later. And we're not here, unfortunately, for the counties. We're not here to serve the counties. We're here to serve the people of Minnesota.
Any other comments, Senator Anstrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple things. So I taught surveying. I have taught surveying at the University of Minnesota since the 90s. And one concept that I teach is this idea called adverse possession, which is a real thing in Minnesota. I would encourage your family and your testifiers' family to review what adverse possession is. It's Chris, your next testifier can talk more to this, but it allows for somebody who has been maintaining and owning property for a certain amount of time to actually have the right to possess it. I'm not a registered land surveyor, so if anybody has any questions, you can ask the registered land surveyor that's about to come up. The other thing I just wanted to bring up, when I was in the Senate in 2021, I did write a bill and drop it to fund this effort by $10 million, and I think the senators got that, or I mean, one of my colleagues did get that through. So the land surveyors do have $10 million to start this effort, but the estimates to replace all of the land survey monuments in Minnesota is not 10 million, it's $300 million. I have a map in my office that, please come look. I'd love to show it off. Swad knows that I love to show it off. It shows every one of the original monuments that was set in Minnesota. They were, in fact, I think the last one was set in 1908 or something like that up in the northwest angle. But the point is that for every mile, we have 9 monuments that have been set, and these are the legal monuments that must be surveyed into when transferring property, everything that the Senator talked about. They're extremely important for so many reasons, and I'm so glad that you are bringing this up, because it's a critical need right now that we have in Minnesota. Yes, it is the government's duty to maintain these monuments. The reality is the government has not been maintaining these monuments, and so we are at a critical point where if we don't start maintaining these monuments, it's going to be even more problematic. So again, 2 things: adverse possession. I'd be happy to talk to you and your testifiers about that in the presence of a registered land surveyor. But secondly, I'm really grateful that you brought this up. It's a huge need. I do have a separate bill that would start to chip away at the funding. Again, we need hundreds of millions of dollars to restore these monuments. And for all of the members on this committee and your colleagues who live in who represent areas outside the 7-county metro area, this is a significant issue for your counties, because many of them don't actually have a registered land surveyor on staff, and so there's additional cost to setting a monument. They have to hire a consultant. It costs about $2,000 to set each one of those monuments, and remember what I said before, there's 9 every square mile. Some are shared, of course, because of the same boundaries, but we have thousands of them, and I'll look forward to your next testifier to talk about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator. Any other questions, Senator Barr?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Green, just so I make sure I'm following along here, when you talk monuments, those are the iron pipe in the ground that's drove in the ground, or there are different types of monuments?
Senator Green.
I'm going to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll answer that as a layman, or not even a layman, but just from what I've heard, I'll put it that way. There's different types, and some of them are even wood, but there are remnants of them in the ground, and from talking to other surveyors, they say you can find them, but it's not always easy. The one thing to address also the other senator's comments, a lot of the property owners, if we can get to them before they pass on, the older guys like Mr. Scott, will be able to tell you the general vicinity of where they are. And I know where mine is because it was always showed to me where it was, the one that's in the corner of my property, I should say. And so they are made of different materials, but I think that, well, in this, they would be replaced with an iron pin. And so it would be much better. But to address just a little bit on the adverse possession, I understand that law, I'm familiar with it, but it also costs money for people to do that when they shouldn't have to, if you follow me. But if you own the property and the markers are there, you shouldn't have to go fight to prove that it's yours or say, this is worth, to fight that in court anyway. It's expensive. The issue with the lady that lost her whole house, I did try to keep up with her. And fortunately, at first her neighbor said, if the land's mine, I want it back. But they did go into negotiations and he did agree to deed it back over to her. But now he's deeded her something that's already hers. Now we've got another mess maybe later.
Thank you, Senator Green. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Any other questions?
I just
or any
want
adjustments
to,
for-
in response, I think it was Senator Barr, I can't remember who asked about the monuments. So the monuments that we're talking about are different than property corners. So some of you may remember from grade school learning about the public land survey, where the entire, most of the U.S. was divided up into 1 mile by 1 mile sections, and those are like the official monuments that we're talking about reestablishing. So on a 1 mile by 1 mile section of land, you'd have one at every corner, one at every half mile, and one at the center. That's the 9 that I talked about. And those could be literally a blaze on a tree. They could be a pile of dirt. I mean, the registered land surveyor is going to come up here in a minute. In Minnesota, that's why, if you think about it being, those were being created back in the 1800s. They weren't always a iron pin. They weren't always as a permanent material as we would expect them to be, which is why now you can imagine it's even more important that they all be reestablished, and they must be reestablished by a licensed land surveyor. We're about to have one talk. We don't have enough of them in Minnesota. We don't have enough of them in the nation. I'm a licensed engineer. You can all do a tally or whatever, however you keep track of how many times I say that. But I can't set a survey monument. So you have to be a registered land surveyor. And so when Senator Green talks about his corner or his marker, unless you are at a corner of a section, he's talking about a separate kind of monument that just is something that he ties his property into. But for official transfer of sale, or like when the DOT or there's a property dispute, these surveys have to be tied into one of those 9 markers. Now, some of them fall inside water and they're not accessible, but these are certified corners that have a higher hierarchy and a higher level of securedness, like because they have been certified by a professional land surveyor, which indeed makes them much more expensive to certify. So if I want to build my deck and I need a survey, it may have a different level of hierarchy, but to establish a corner, those corners must be certified by a licensed registered land surveyor, and we can ask, when Mr. Raines comes on, we can ask him how many there are in Minnesota. There is a huge need for him.
All right,
So,
thank you, Senator. Is Mr. Phil Raines from the Minnesota Society of Professional Surveyors here? Hello, Mr. Raines. You got a little souvenir for us. Mr. Raines, please state your name for the record, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, chairs, senators. Thank you for having me. Phil Raines. I am representing the Minnesota Society of Professional Surveyors. I am not a surveyor myself, but I do have a phone a friend in the back of the room who can answer the technical questions for you. I want to specifically thank Senator Green for bringing this forward. This very much highlights the importance of maintaining the public land survey system, the PLSS. It is the basis for our tenure system, land tenure system here in Minnesota, and basically 2/3 of the United States of America. This is the basis for how your property is guaranteed. And Senator Green and I were talking before, and there's an old straight line libertarian idea that says, you know, there's three roles for government: to guarantee your safety, and that's police and the military. There's guaranteeing the contract execution. That's basically what the courts do. And guaranteeing private property. And that's essentially what this does. This lays out whose property is where and makes a real world interpretation of where the land is. Quick background, Senator Johnson Stewart obviously knows a ton about this. I'll give you just a quick background of it. These got laid between 1850 and 1890, and I think there was a few left into 1908. But this is going back quite a ways. And if you think about it, the tools that they had at the time, this was 2 mules, a length of chain, and a compass that largely they got sent out with. And vast majority of them did a great job. Occasionally, unfortunately, in some of the areas that we're talking about, not such a great job sometimes. But what was laid down is the legally binding markers that set this out. And the most important thing is that you're consistent along the way. Because once those are laid out, then you base everything off of it, and every property references those PLS section corners. Okay, and as long as you're consistent with it, even if the lines are crooked, it's okay. You can still, it's not ideal, but you can still work with it, right? And as Senator Johnson Stewart said, the number one thing we try to do as surveyors is to put these markers back in their original place. I'm a government relations guy. I've learned about this over the last few years that I've been representing them. I was learning, even though these got laid down 150 years ago, half the job of a surveyor is historian, half the job is measurement technician, engineer. So they have to research what's out there, and their job, their goal is to put these back within the size of a coffee canister. That's for the stuff that's really lost. There's occasionally, when you're out in the boondocks in the middle of nowhere, like there's no private property, you may have to use a mathematical formula to put one back in place. But the vast majority of the time, they can go back and look at original deeds that go back to those times, and they can place that within, like I said, the size of a coffee canister. Use modern methods when you put on the GPSs that they're able to have. GPS is one tool. They're trying to keep it within a 1/4 inch of where it was before. So they're very close.
Thank you, Mr. Raines. Senators, any other questions or comments? Senator Kroon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, I understand surveys. My question is with respect to the subdivision 4, lines 2.3 to 2.10, the pre-establishing boundary lines. The county looks to be given some authority here to alter a boundary line once it finishes its work. If I'm understanding that correctly, and looks like they're starting a court action in which to do that. So, like, if I'm understanding correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I could be here, but these kinds of things happen all the time in private disputes right now, and we have Senator Johnson Stewart mentioned adverse possession, but there's also quiet title actions, practical location of boundaries. You could register it into the Torrens Act. You could, or if it's already registered, you could bring a proceeding subsequent. You could register a boundary within the Torrens system, which requires a survey, have that recorded with the registrar of titles, et cetera. All those are done in private disputes right now, where surveyors often get involved and are employed to settle a dispute between property owners. And if you have monuments or other markers that are eroded or whatever, that usually can play into those. But I guess if the county does this on a proactive basis and just goes out there and starts fixing all of these historical problems, and then is given the authority to start a court action to adjust the boundary lines pursuant to the work that they're doing, and that's how I'm understanding it, which could be wrong, we're going to be creating a ton of conflict here between property owners, are we not?
Senator Green or Mr. Raines?
I'm going to be really upfront with you, Mr. Chair. I gave the researchers what I wanted, and this is what they drafted, okay? And they tried to make it legal. And obviously, I know that you're a pretty smart lawyer, so if you think something needs to be changed, I will certainly look at that. But that's not really how I read it. And so if it's wrong, then we need to talk. But I think for the way that I read it and the way I suspected that it would be is that once those original markers were set, then there would be an opportunity then for if there was a legitimate wrong in the lines, that it could be corrected. But if you have a better plan, I will obviously do that, because for me, what I want is those original monuments to be put back in to avoid exactly what you're talking about as far as having more litigation. And quite honestly, the issue is that we're having are not necessarily among too many property owners in my area. Most of it is if the land is bordering state land and dealing with state agencies as well.
Thank you, Senator Green. And for committee members, this will, it's next stop for this bill. Both the co-chair and I, we've talked, and it's going to be sent to judiciary. So maybe this can be worked on a little bit, and you guys can deal with that when it gets to judiciary.
I was going to say that's a good preview of what's to come.
I'll save my questions then.
All right. Any other questions? Co-chair Lang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you for bringing the bill to begin with. I think it is an important issue, and every time I think about land usage and property lines, I always think back to a former life when I worked in the county park system of Renville County, and we have some rock outcroppings. And because of a land sale that happened in that county, the USGS came out, and she had a photocopy of a historical document that was done in the mid-1880s. And we traipsed through the woods to find what was described as a pile of rocks. And it was a nice little picture someone had drawn in the mid-1880s of a pile of rocks. Now, I had walked through the woods there many, many times, but we got up there, and sure enough, there are those rocks that look just like the picture from 125 years ago or 130 years ago at the time. And underneath that was a section corner chiseled into the stone. And she had a Trimble, a good GPS unit that they use. Everybody knows what a Trimble is, or what. Sets it there and says, you know what, we're within. She says it's almost immeasurable how close everything within this county is. And just to have that, not only the history, like you said, but to have that precision from that long ago, and then as we, as a society, try to include our technology and include everything into our GIS or into our GPS or whatever it may be, we need to ensure that it's dead accurate. We have the technology, right? We have the ability to be as accurate as we possibly can. I don't know if this is the right language. I'm not even going to really try to dig into it and try to that's for a different committee. They can talk about the legal aspects to it. But I think our job is to say, yeah, there's an issue here. There's something that we're going to try to address the best way possible. And as it goes through the process, we're going to make sure that it works right. So with that, again, thanks for hearing this. Thanks for bringing the bill up today, and we'll work on it.
Thank you, Chair Lang. I had a question, it was brought up earlier, so when maybe this might be for Mr. Raines, when a county is reevaluating public land boundaries, how do they incorporate records of boundary lines to reconcile with lines that are generated through, the new technology that Senator Green had mentioned?
Okay. Kind of a difficult question in a way, but we'll put it this way. When we go out and recertify a monument and we get new data on it that says what it is, we simply record where those are and we put that on file with the county. It's put in the county recorder's office, which is also what's done whenever there's a private survey to record a title or deed for a property. And it will simply say that. We do the GIS program, Geographic Information Systems program, does go off of this and then reuses that and publishes that most people see as a county, as a line somewhere. What we kind of want to say is that the lines for the surveyors at least never move. They're staying right where they're at. It's sometimes what the next level that comes off of that, the GIS, the county plats that are drawn off of it, that they may have new information and they may think that line goes in a different spot than it did before.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Raines. And so Senator Co-Chair Lang moves that Senate File 59 as amended be recommended to pass and re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The motion prevails. Senate File 59 as amended is recommended to pass and re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Thank you, Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair,
All right.
members. Appreciate it.
Now we will move on to council overviews. Looks like first off, we will have the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs. And as they're getting set up with the technology, today we will be giving an overview of all the different councils here in the state of Minnesota. Next off, looks like we will have the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. And then we will follow up after that one. Let's do it first, right? Okay. Are you ready?
We are, I think.
All right. Well, please welcome. Please state your name and title, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Rosa Toc. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present before you today. Today I'm joined here by the chair of our board, Ms. Yvette Isea Martinez, and our legislative director in the area of economic development, Mr. David Campana. And we will be offering a very short overview of the council's work. I think that you might have received a packet with reports from our agency for you to learn a little bit more in detail about the scope and comprehensive nature of our work. So I think that you had that in your packet, including our community priority report, our annual report, and also we have prepared for you a fact sheet with statistics and demographics about Latinos in your respective district. So who are we? The Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs is one of the 3 ethnic councils for the state of Minnesota. We were established by this body 47 years ago, and we are a nonpartisan state agency in the executive branch. Per statute, our main purpose is to work for the implementation of the social, economic, political, and legal equality of Latino Minnesotans with the state legislature and government. We focus on 3 main policy legislative areas: education, access to affordable health care, and economic development, integrating the immigration experiences of our constituents. So how do we do our work? We have a very small but highly dedicated and qualified team, all of us bilingual and bicultural. 2 of them are with me this morning, Mr. Campana and also Mrs. Jauregui, our office manager. We are supported by the board with 15 council members. 11 are community members appointed by the governor, and 4 are bicameral legislative members appointed by the leadership in each party. We have 2 standing committees, an executive committee and a legislative committee. The agency has 5 FTEs. One of them was recently authorized in the last biennium, and currently we have 2 vacancies. One of them, a legislative director position, which should be filled by the end of next month. So who do we serve? We serve all Minnesotans. We serve all the people of Minnesota, and per our statute, we advise on the Latino Minnesotans' socioeconomic condition. As such, as you can see, we are an integral part of Minnesota. We are a growing, fastly growing population, and right now we represent 6.4% of the total population, which is an increase from 4.7% since 2010. Currently, according to estimates by the American Community Survey, we stand at 367,000 residents, but we know that we might be more than that because sometimes we are on the register by the census. In 10 years, approximately, it is projected that the Latino population will grow to more than 500,000 residents. As you can see also in this graph, we live in every county of the state, and we contribute to every county of the state in each one of the districts that you represent. You can see the percentage of the Latino population in the 5 top counties for the state of Minnesota. Also, as you know, we are a very diverse population. Our roots are in different regions of Latin America and the Caribbean, and as you can see, 2/3 of Latino Minnesotans have Mexican origins, followed by Puerto Ricans. As you know, they are citizens of this country, and followed by Ecuadorians and Central Americans and South Americans. One thing to note is that about 4 in 5 Latino Minnesotans are U.S. citizens, around 80%, and 90% of children born in the U.S., of Latinos who are born in the U.S. as well. Our voting Latino eligible voters is also increasing to almost 4% of voters in the state of Minnesota are Latinos. Our communities are assets to the prosperity and quality of life of this state. Human, social, and cultural capital, Latinos and other BIPOC communities are driving the population growth in Minnesota. Latino Minnesotans are very young. The median age is 25 compared to 38 for the state. And as you can also see, the economic contributions of Latinos in terms of buying power, in terms of tax payments, in terms of entrepreneurship is very large. And right now, the unemployment rate for Latinos is relatively low, and 76.5% comprises the labor force participation, which is also one of the highest in the state. However, despite these contributions and the growth and strength that we bring to the state of Minnesota, there are still some disparities and opportunity gaps, and those are the ones that we hear in the community when we visit the community and have listening sessions. These are the different topics that we hear that continue to affect our communities, and they propose solutions, and they come to us to help us push for legislation that also support these communities that are still facing some limitations in terms of housing affordability, their well-being and preventive health, how to remove barriers to financial stability and provide incentives for small businesses, for instance, and also investing in targeted programs to secure job opportunities by hiring, training, and retaining a diverse workforce in strategic work sectors of the economy. So how do we do that? And to address some of the challenges that we hear in the community, in the last biennium, these are some of the achievements that I can also outline for you, but that you can also find in the documents that we provided to you this afternoon. So in partnership with other organizations and advocates and other councils and state agencies, we have been able in the last biennium to lead or co-lead or support 21 bills. 9 of those passed during the last biennium. We inform and educate legislators in a bipartisan fashion. We talk with all legislators in this body about the community needs, but also opportunities and solutions. We also co-convene a new and innovative space of collaboration and advocacy with other Latino organizations that we call the Minnesota Latino Leadership Alliance. We also advise the governor's office and 11 interagency work groups with advice and recommendations and solutions that we hear and come from our communities. In terms of the added value that we bring, not only to this body, but to the state of Minnesota and the public in general, again, when we conduct listening sessions, 3 of them we conducted last year in Wilmar, in Rochester, and also in Moorhead. We prepare a report that is also sent to your attention. It's also for the use of the public, and we provide this information bilingual, and we also try to provide data, facts based on census data. We have a newsletter with 16,000 subscribers, and we have provided in the last biennium 24 bilingual newsletters, and also 4 bilingual legislative reports to inform the public. At the same time, we have convened the community 2 days on the Hill in the biennium. And finally, we produced 5 videos celebrating MCLA's 45th anniversary in 2023. For this biennium and specifically for this session, we have some legislative priorities. And now, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn it over to Mr. David Campana for the next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Campana. You may state your name and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is David Campana, Legislative and Policy Director in Economic Development. Latino has the highest labor force participation rate in the state. Minority-owned businesses, and particularly female-owned businesses, are growing at a faster rate than the Minnesota average. However, these successes have not yet translated to higher incomes or more economic stability for these communities. In the area of economic development, we recommend a streamlined certification for foreign-trained professionals, stronger labor protections, wage equality, and expanded bilingual workforce development programs and outreach. Support small Latino businesses' efforts to develop technical skills to access capital and credit. Support the establishment of an ombudsperson for safety, health, and well-being of agricultural and food processing workers. and support the creation of an affordable auto insurance program. We believe that by doing this, we will contribute to the financial well-being and stability of the Latino communities in the state. I will invite Rosa to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, David.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Executive Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, in education, we also have high hopes for the success, the academic success of our students, and we hear in the community about the importance of diversity, a diverse teacher workforce, expand opportunities to higher education, including vocational and technical careers. And cultural assets are also very important for our students and our communities as a foundation to their success. So the Council is committed to advancing legislation and supporting organizations that educate about our diverse histories, traditions, and cultures. In health, we have been working also in the last, not only in the last biennium, but in the last decades, trying to support Latino organizations to bridge healthcare gaps and access to essential services, addressing language barriers, limited culturally competent care, and geographic challenges. At the same time, we want to support resources and assistance to Latino agricultural workers that might be affected by water contamination, and support the creation of a Latina violence prevention task force office. And for the last slide, I'd like to invite Chair Yvette to present. Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Executive Director. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. You may be, please state your name and you may begin with your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Yvette Isaiah Martinez. I'm a member at large at the Minnesota Council and also the chair of the board. The Council strongly supports state-level immigration policies that are both humane and non-discriminatory and that consider our country's long-standing values of inclusion and integration. In addition, the Council will continue promoting awareness around the contributions of immigrants to the state's not only economy, but also to the culture and society to ensure that Minnesota is a welcoming state with a future of strength and economic competitiveness, residing in its vibrant and diverse social capital. This wasn't planned, but I do want to share with you. 29 years ago, I arrived to the country. 29 years ago, I came across the Council on Latino Affairs. I was 16 and too young to understand their work. 29 years later, I had the courage to become the chair of the board, and I'm serving my second term. I share that just as a proof of the impact that the Council has in Latinos, but also in the community.
Thank you. And Executive Director Rosa, do you have anything else to add for the testimony here?
Mr. Chair, thank you. No, that will be our presentation this morning. Thank you. And if you have any question, we'll be more than happy to respond.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to make sure that we were good on time and the other councils can present. Maybe if we can leave questions till after all the councils have presented, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And the next, the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. All right. Please state your name for the record, and you may proceed with the testimony.
Good morning, Chair Xiong, Chair Lang, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sia He, and I am the Executive Director of the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. Some of you may know that I am now the longest-serving Executive Director of the 3 ethnic councils. I began my tenure in March of 2013. I'm joined today, to my left, Andy Morris, our Legislative and Public Affairs team member. Our chair, Mr. Brian Tawara, is unable to join us this morning, and he sends his regrets. Before I go any further, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. Andy and I are both recovering. Andy's recovering from the cold. I'm recovering from a very bad case of RSV. And so if at any point in time I need to leave the testifying table, I just wanted to let you know that that's the case. So again, thank you for the opportunity to come before all of you today for the purpose of providing you with a high-level overview of our council, specifically who we are, what we do, and our budget request for the biennium. The Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans, like the other 2 ethnic councils, is a nonpartisan, non-cabinet executive branch agency. We were created in 1985 at a time when the Asian Pacific Minnesotan ancestry community in Minnesota was less than 1%. Today, our community comprises of nearly 7% of Minnesota's total population. The legislature in 1985 created this agency to bridge the gap that often exists between Asian Pacific Minnesotans and their state government. This was the case 40 years ago, and it remains the case today. As you know, the 3 ethnic councils share one enabling statute, and that's Section 15.0145 of state law. Per this enabling statute, we are charged with the following duties. 1, to advise the governor and the legislature on issues confronting Minnesota's Asian Pacific ancestry communities. 2, to advocate for administrative and legislative changes needed to improve the lives of these Minnesotans. And 3, to serve as a liaison between state government and the organizations that serve Asian Pacific Minnesotans. This enabling statute also provides for the establishment of a board consisting of 11 voting members. Actually of 15 voting members, 11 of whom are appointed by the governor, and then 4 appointed by legislative leaders. You may know that currently Senators Pratt and Pa serve on our board as the Senate's representatives. The work of our council is carried out by a very small but mighty team of 4 FTEs. This team consists of myself in the role of executive director, Andy Morris, in the role of Legislative and Public Affairs Director, our Research Director, Jessica Evian, and then our Office Manager, Maitong Bang. Including temporary positions, we would at times also employ a research assistant and several legislative fellows or interns. We are currently in the design phase of launching a policy advocacy program. You may also know that our agency is entirely funded by general fund appropriation. You'll also note that our budget includes an other funds account, and that's just an account that we fundraise for the purpose of hosting the biennial Asian Pacific Minnesotans Leadership Awards dinner. I know, Senator Coran, that you have attended that event with us in years before. The majority of our budget is allocated to staff compensation. In fiscal year 2024, that was 71% of our budget. The remainder is allocated to operating expenses, including rent, minute services, supplies, equipment, travel, and other operating items. I'm just going to, Chair Shong and Chair Lang, may I take a few seconds worth of a break to ask if someone has some tissues?
Yes, maybe one of our pages can bring over a tissue.
Thank you, and I apologize.
No problem.
Thank you.
Maybe your co-testifier may continue, or we can certainly have you continue on for us.
I am good to go.
All right.
Thank you.
Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Shong. The community that our agency seeks to advise you in your capacities as legislators on is quite a diverse community. This community is estimated at almost 370,000 strong, and we reside in every single one of the 87 counties throughout the state of Minnesota. Some of us came here as immigrants or refugees, while others have been Minnesotans for generations. Again, this community of contrast is incredibly diverse in almost every way possible. We have community members who identify as the highest and who come in with the highest and lowest levels of education in the state. Some are incredibly financially secure, while others are struggling to get by because perhaps they just arrived here on a plane about a year ago after decades of civil wars in their native countries. While there are many groups that make up the Asian Pacific Minnesotan community, the 5 largest groups by population are first the Hmong, second the Asian Indian, third the Chinese, fourth the Vietnamese, and fifth the Korean. Again, those are the 5 largest Asian Pacific Islander ancestry communities. Other smaller communities that you may not be as familiar with include the Karen, the Karenni, the Micronesians, and the Lao. And then I'll touch on how we carry out our duties. In doing so, we conduct a wide range of activities. We curate original research, such as our Emerging Communities Report. We educate and encourage our community members to engage with their legislators and in our state's policymaking process with signature events such as our Day at the Capitol. We advise and encourage legislators and members of the executive branch to engage with our communities by identifying, inviting, and staffing these very leaders at key community events throughout the year. We provide assistance, and we attend more than 100 community events on any given year. We remain on call 24/7 to inform and advise state leaders and other government leaders on emerging issues and situations involving our communities. The breadth and depth of our council's work increased to an unprecedented level over the past biennium. Some examples include, 1, liaising with foreign consulates and dignitaries on issues of importance to our communities, including justice, democracy, economic development, trade relations, and sister city relationships. 2, pursuing partnerships with state and federal government offices to address the nationwide rise in anti-Asian hate and organized crimes committed against Asian places of worship. Between June and August of this year, more than 14 Asian American temples were burglarized, and we worked with local law enforcement, state and federal government offices to help bring an end to that series of burglaries. And third, initiating legislative requests for funding to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, which included convening more than 20 planning meetings with Minnesota's Lao, Cambodian, and Vietnamese communities to ensure authentic representation in these funding requests and commemorative activities. Finally, our council pursues a legislative agenda based on the results of a biennial community priority survey and the intelligence we gather from our ongoing and quite intensive community engagement schedule. Based on the results of the 2024 survey, our priority issues for the 2025 session are access to healthcare, arts, culture, and heritage, income and wages, home ownership, and employment. These are just a few examples of the work we do at the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans as we seek to carry out our statutory duties. At this point in time, I'll just end on the note that we are requesting a $370,000 increase over our base in the coming biennium. This would allow us to add 1 additional FTE, a special projects coordinator, to our current staff team. This increase would also bring our budget into parity with those of the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs and the Council on Minnesotans of African Heritage. The governor, however, has recommended only a 2% increase over our base for the coming biennium, which amounts to an increase of $28,000 to account for operating costs increases. While we at the Asian Pacific Council serve the fastest growing ancestry community across the nation, a community that has grown by over 900% in Minnesota since the council's founding more than 40 years ago, our council has long lagged behind the other 2 ethnic councils in both funding and staff levels, despite the fact that we serve similar size communities. Certainly, we at the Asian Pacific Council understand and appreciate the difficult decisions facing the legislature this year, but we humbly ask that you carefully take into consideration our change item request. given that the community we seek to work on behalf of within state government is rapidly growing, and again, is the most linguistically and culturally diverse cultural community. So, chairs and members of the committee, this concludes my overview of the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. I understand that we disseminated some materials to all of you. You're always welcome to call us. I kind of jokingly say the only time I won't answer my phone is between 3 in the morning and 6 in the morning. And with that said, Andy and I are more than happy to address any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. And then next up, we will have the Council on LGBTQ+ Minnesotans and their council. All right, well, welcome. Please state your full name and title for the record, and you may begin with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Emma McBride. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of the Council on LGBTQIA2S+ Minnesotans. Our official state acronym is MNQT, so you can refer to us as MNQT for short. We were established by the legislature in 2023 under Minnesota Statute 15.0147 to work for the implementation of economic, social, legal, and political equality for Minnesota's Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ community. We're the newest established executive council, and again, we're established in 2023, but didn't become operational until I was hired in May of 2024. So we're in our first biennium and really thrilled to be here with you all. Our council is made up of 12 governor-appointed public voting members and 4 appointed legislators. We currently have 11 of 12 seats filled and are actively working with the governor's office to fill the final seat. We have 1 of our legislative seats filled, Representative Breon Curran, and really hope to fill the final 3 and have been having some conversations about that. Our staff structure is 2 permanent FTEs, myself and our senior operations specialist. We did have some funds roll over from fiscal year 24 that allowed us to hire 3 temporary FTEs to support our community engagement, research, and communication initiatives. Our budget is annually $499,000, which allows us to comfortably have 2 FTEs. At this budget, if we were to add a 3rd FTE, we would be spending about 80% of our budget on personnel, which leaves little wiggle room for any operations or programmatic spending. The governor is recommending a $24,000 increase to our budget per biennium. We support this increase as any increase to our budget would allow us to have that 3rd FTE and effectively fulfill our mandate. We'll be doing some strategic planning and research and data collection over the next several months that will help us better understand if a 3rd FTE is both feasible and effective for fulfilling our mandate, or if we might need to contract out that work and reserve some funds per program and operations. Our work is guided by our statutory purpose of ensuring that LGBTQIA2S+ Minnesotans are fully represented in state government, and officials like yourself have expert advice on issues related to our communities. Our core functions include advocacy, research, engagement, and public awareness. We're focusing heavily in the first few years on research and data collection to make sure that our agenda is data-driven and research-backed. We're also, as a new agency, focusing on public engagement to ensure that our agenda is reflective of community voices and reflective of the needs of LGBTQIA2S+ Minnesotans. Our communities represent a diverse and growing population in Minnesota. We are an understudied community, but we do know that we are in every corner of the state, every cultural group, and every demographic group. Most recent estimates of our community were from the Household Pulse Survey in March 2024, which estimates that adults, LGBTQ Minnesota adults make up about 11% of adults in our state. Research also shows that our communities have significantly increased challenges with mental health. We know that this is due to disparities and access to gender-affirming care, mental health care, access to safe and supportive communities, and social stigma. So addressing these disparities starts with advocating for policies that are inclusive for LGBTQ people and address some of our basic needs. In the first couple months, we had the opportunity to partner with Minclusive, the state's LGBTQIA+ employee resource group, to design and distribute a survey during Twin Cities Pride in the final days of June. We collected responses from 167 participants. The three most pressing issues noted were legal rights and protections, access to gender-affirming care, and mental health services. 44.9% of survey respondents were impacted by Minnesota's trans refuge policy, which means that either the respondent themselves or somebody they knew had moved to Minnesota in the last 2 years to seek safety as an LGBTQIA2S+ person. 67.1% of respondents have experienced discrimination or harassment in the last year, and public spaces, workplace, and online were the most common settings for this maltreatment. During our first 9 months, we focused on laying the groundwork for a sustainable and impactful organization. We focused on infrastructure development, drafting and adopting bylaws, and establishing governance structures for our council, strategic planning, which included one-to-one council member interviews, full-day retreat, and focus groups. And we also focused on recruiting critical personnel to support our administrative functions and temporary specialists to advance our community engagement, communication, and research objectives. We also engaged the community, conducting the Pride Survey, engaging stakeholders, and partnering with Minclusive for Trans Day of Remembrance. We've been working with Management Analysis and Development Division to collect some data across agencies so that we can better collaborate and make recommendations for state agency programs. And finally, we've joined key working groups on legislative, administrative, and policy initiatives. In our first 9 months, strategic planning has been the cornerstone of our work to ensure that we are aligned with the pressing needs of our communities. We've established 3 emerging strategic priorities, and we're calling them emerging because we know they're subject to change and grow as we continue our strategic planning and community engagement. But the 3 strategic priorities we've established thus far are conducting research, engaging community, and advancing community interests. We've also established some emerging issue priorities, including support for transgender youth, equity for our communities in Greater Minnesota, addressing racial disparities within the LGBTQIA2S+ community, support for aging populations, economic development, state funding, and access to mental and physical health care. In 2025, we have some big plans that are already underway. We're leveraging the $419,000 that rolled over from fiscal year 24 before we were operational. These funds expire on June 30th of 2025, and we're using these funds for our expanded staff capacity and implementing research and community engagement initiatives to advance our emerging strategic priorities, which again include research, community engagement, and advancing our community's interests. These initiatives include a statewide survey which will collect insights on experiences, priorities, and challenges that LGBTQIA2S+ people are experiencing in Minnesota. We'll also host community conversations focused on the most underrepresented and underserved members of our community. We'll assess strengths, gaps, and challenges among organizations serving our communities, and again, connecting with state agency staff to better understand how Minnesota is currently serving our communities and where the barriers might be. Finally, we are developing a 3 to 5 year research agenda and building partnerships with academic and research institutions. Thank you again for having us today. We are thrilled to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. And next up, we have the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council to give us their overview. If you're ready, please state your name for the record and your position, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair Lang. Thank you, Chair Zhang, and the committee members for this amazing opportunity to come and talk about the work we're doing, and we appreciate your curiosity about the agency itself. My name is Brandon Elkire. I'm the Legislative Director for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council.
Anine, my name is Shannon Gizik, Executive Director for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Thank you, Chair and members.
So today, we're very excited to share the work we've been doing, really highlight some of the importance of having us in the community and show that we are an asset to the state. For today's presentation, I'm going to give a brief background of the history for the Indian Affairs Council, what makes MIAC unique, some of our statutory duties, and then celebrations on the successes from our work. So to start, we have a mission statement that was created for us back in the 60s to protect the sovereignty of the 11 tribal nations and to ensure the well-being of American Indian citizens throughout Minnesota. What this means for us and what guides our work is we like to put this into 3 buckets, spaces that we have to be present in. First, there's present within the 11 tribal nations that share geography with our state, present with our urban Indian populations, and then present through the state tribal relations. So within those 3 buckets is really where our work entails. So let me start with the background. In 1956, the federal government enacted an Indian Relocation Act. The premise of this act was to entice Native Americans who are living on reservations or residing on the reservations to relocate to the various cities across the country on the promise of employment, housing, and education. Unfortunately, when these large swaths of Native Americans arrived in the various cities, this included San Francisco, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Cleveland. When they arrived, they realized that there was no jobs, there was no path to education, and they only were given enough money for 2 months of rent. For Minneapolis, this created a vast poverty pool for our urban Indian population, as this was one of the main cities for this relocation policy. The city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota had no interest in leveling the field at the time or honoring the federal promise that brought all these Native Americans to this city. This resulted in a high poverty, high crime amalgamation for the Native American residents. So during this time, the Native American population found that there was high discrimination and lack of access to services like housing, police protections, so on and so forth, from both the city and the state. One of the responses at the time was, and what we're very happy about, is this was the beginning of the creation for the Native American First Indian Affairs Council in 1963. Today, we make up 2% of our state population, and our Indian Affairs Council has expanded from those days when it was originally a 3-hour morning meeting to now a 3-day full engagement conversation between tribal leaders and our state leadership. So the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council is unique in several ways. Our assigned role from the onset was to be a liaison between the state and the tribal nations and their urban Indian population. Our mission is to balance the interest of both the tribal nations with the state of Minnesota. And our work has centered on making sure that the relationship that's been built over the years between tribal nations and entities of the state is preserved and protected. We know that we all do better when we all do better. And so that has been at the core of the work that we do. We're required to be subject matter. Another unique factor is we are required from the onset to be subject matter experts in all facets of government, because all facets of government touch tribal nations. So we're really uniquely positioned in the work that we do. Executive Director Gizik here and I, because we touch every facet of the state, we are in every part of the state consistently. Thankfully, there's two of us. How we split the state is another question, but the composition of our board really also is a driving factor for what makes this Indian Affairs Council unique. We have 10 of the 11 elected tribal leaders from 10 of the 11 tribal nations. We have several commissioners that sit on our board, legislators. We are a nonpartisan board, so we have legislators from both parties. We have reps from the governor's office, and the composition of this board is truly a government-to-government relation and affair. Our statutory mandates have MIAC as an expert in the field, particularly in the Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act, which is commonly known as NAGPRA, the Minnesota Graves Protection Act, leaders in language revitalization efforts, technical assistance in all areas related to tribal-state relations, and education in most matters related to Native American populations. Again, because we're subject matter experts across a wide swath, this is why we do also education in those areas. Our core functions of, we have 11 statutory duties under 3.922, which can be summarized in 3 core functions: technical assistance, advising, and building and developing relations between our tribal leaders and tribal nations and the state of Minnesota. I highlighted a couple in the packets that I passed out. I highlighted 6 of the duties that we are very proud of that we do on a daily basis that just kind of seem like common practice now, but analyzing and making recommendations to tribal elected leaders, to you leaders for the legislature. It shows the wide breadth of the work that we do. In some of the celebrations that we have currently, the Indian Affairs Council has our robust language symposium, now in its 4th year with a steady increase of participants each year. I want to kind of go a little bit deep in this, not too deep though, because the Dakota language was on this brink of extinction. And so with our efforts, with your investments, this has now been brought back from that and is working its way into a more robust living language again. Our cultural affairs team has conducted approximately 1,200 reviews for development plans and protection of many graves and artifacts. You guys were having a discussion on a lot of the survey pieces. That is exactly what we do as well within the Indian Affairs Council. Our MIAC meetings have grew, like I said, from 1-day event to 3-day event, with 1 day dedicated strictly to the state agency commissioners. To date, we've held hundreds of educational trainings in the past year on both how to interact with tribal nations, wording, and we've done a lot of technical assistance with you good folks. And then finally, we are crucial advisors for several federal agencies and state initiatives. And this is key right now because we've done trainings on federal levels as well. So with that, did you want to say anything?
Well, just, if there are any questions, Chair, committee members?
It's all right. And then are there any other testifiers that you have?
Not today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your testimony, and I just wanted to express our thanks for all the executive councils for taking the time to come and join us here today. I know many of you have driven a far way to be here with us today. I know our time is short, but I would like to open it up for any questions we might have from members. Senator May-Quade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's actually for Executive Director Herr, and I'm so sorry, and I appreciate your presentation.
Yes.
Or anybody from the Council for Asian Pacific Minnesotans.
Mr. Morrison. Senator May-Quade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a very light, easy question. I'm more putting it out there because I have you in front of me. One of the pieces we're working on for the READ Act is to now help get our arms around not every language is a phonetic language. And so we want to make sure that we are building the right resources for screenings and for tracking literacy rates for immersion programs. Not every language that's not phonetic is, within the realm of Asian Pacific Minnesotans, but a lot of them are. And so I would love to just work with the council to make sure we are being as inclusive as possible and just developing the right resources. So please reach out to me so we can do that.
All right, Mr. Morrison, any
Thanks.
quick blurb back?
Just simply, Chair Zhang, Senator May-Quade, thank you very much. We would love to work with you.
All right. Any other members? Questions, comments? All right, well, thank you all again for taking the time to give us your overviews and all the different communities that you represent. For all the members, I just want to give a quick heads up. We will have a meeting this coming Thursday. Chair Lang will chair that committee, and our staff, our two staff, community administrators, will meet on Friday and agree on an agenda, and we'll get that sent out to all of you, okay? And with that, our committee, if there's not any other questions, our committee is adjourned. Thank you.